it is. It's just like the delay is strange. Anyways,
And it's
I feel
variable.
it is so variable. See, like right now, just connected in like a second, and we're live. It is Tuesday, July 13th, 5:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Is it 3:05 p.m.?
305 Mountain. Yeah.
Nailed it. Nailed it. And we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have Ifeoma Ozoma, who is I would like to say a friend at this point. We have like known each other long, and I like comment enough on your Twitter and Instagram stories that like I feel like I have a window into your beautiful little life in Santa Fe. But Ifeoma's here to talk today kind of about like all of the stuff that she's done in tech, and then most recently kind of the stuff that she's become so well known for in a larger capacity, including leaving kind of Pinterest, violating an NDA, and whistleblowing on some of the racial bias and bias against women that she saw within the company. And so welcome to the show.
Oh, of course. I like go to mute myself. Right.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like, I was also going to say, if your dog comes at any point, dogs are really welcome on In Lieu of Fun.
She's
So,
running around outside, and the other one is snoring in the sunroom. So,
well, there you go.
yeah.
Okay. So I guess I'll start us off, which is kind of walk us through your background, how you came into tech. You went to Yale.
Mhm.
You are like a lot younger than me, like deceptively. So
I don't share my age, so people have
do
a
people not?
range of like 2 decades. They have no idea how old I am.
I think that like I'm not gonna say like, there's race components to this, but there's also like gender components to this.
Hmm.
It is very hard to tell. Like depending on how you do your hair, how you dress, like the makeup you wear, it can be really, really, really hard to tell women's age. So that's fair. But in any event, you've been working in public policy and government relations at Google, at Facebook, at Pinterest. Kind of tell us about how you picked that like industry as the place that you wanted to kind of make a difference getting out of school, and like, how your mind got changed.
Yeah, well, I decided coming out of Yale to go to Google because it was either that or it was going to be law school. I had a focus on the Fourth Amendment and the third party doctrine specifically. And this is basically the only audience where the people I'm talking to will actually know what that is when I
No,
mention
there is
it.
a no. I just want to like interrupt for a second and say that like literally our audience is so bright, and they know so much, and it's also very kind. So you should feel very comfortable today. Like it's not full of trolls on the side there or anything else. So yeah.
Nice, nice. Well, studying that, my options were law school and a ton of debt, or Google and the opposite of a ton of debt. And so, and so I decided to go to Google, and really, I wanted to see what privacy violations look like from the inside. And I say that and people laugh, but I'm dead serious. That's why I went to Google. I started on the policy team there. And from the policy team, there was recruited out to Facebook, from Facebook to Pinterest as the second person on the policy team there. And the reason why I made the transition from Facebook to Pinterest is the company was pre-IPO at that time. I was the second person on the policy team and managing all of our US policy, all of our international relationships with orgs like the WHO, CDC, and others. And it was the type of opportunity that there's no chance I would get at a place as big as Facebook or as big as Google. And then it devolved into utter hell. But that's been documented widely.
Yeah, but I think that, so I'm going to put a couple of links in, including the New York Times profile on you, into the chat. But it would be great if you kind of talk to people who don't work in tech and don't kind of understand how this works. what public policy and government relations from the tech company side means. So I'm going to give my version of it, of how I explain it. And I actually want to, like, I've never fact checked this. So I just like have made this up in my own mind. So like, you can tell me if I'm right or not. So I imagine myself in this vein, and like, I'm looking at you because I know you're Genevieve, because I know that you've been watching The West Wing. And I'm just like, I think of myself as like this, I feel like there's this entire generation of people, or like of young people, that grew up on kind of the propaganda. And like, honestly, Aaron Sorkin is like hugely propagandist about like around like kind of the role of government and the great things the government can do. And then watched that sour during like the Bush administration or whatever, and then felt much better about it when like Obama came into power and everything else. But that there was like basically an idea too that simultaneously was like, well, part of like the great future of America is like these great tech companies and these like the fact that we've like created these. And if we want to make a difference, I feel like there was this kind of like, well, you can go into government, and there was a whole, like, I have so many friends that went into government, and then so many friends that left government for tech, or that now I see going into tech. And so this is kind of my Aaron Sorkin phenomenon of like how to make the impact in the good way, like the ideals that Sorkin kind of like embedded and like kind of dramatized in all of us culturally. And I know that sounds a little bit kind of glib and a little bit light, but I actually think it's kind of realistic. And it's when I talk to people that are at tech, like they thought that this was maybe to an extent like that they could do good from within. So I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, a lot of people thought that. Not me though. I like, government's corrupt because people are in government. Tech is corrupt because people are in tech. And so understanding that, it was really about learning the ins and outs of the tech industry in probably the best way to do it, which is within the policy team. I've put things in different pockets of my mind. But one of the things that I just thought of was the experience I had when I was at Google over the summer of 2016, working with the RNC. So folks like Sean Spicer,
I've heard of him.
The whole debate crew, going.
Wasn't he on Dancing
convention.
with the Stars? Sorry.
After. And also at Harvard at some point, which I think says something about Harvard versus Yale. But anyway, yeah, I had the most incredibly just ridiculous experiences within the policy space in a way that I couldn't have if I'd gone into government. And then I also got to see, as someone who's always been cynical, I think it's an Alaskan thing maybe. I grew up in Anchorage.
Which high school?
No, I went to boarding school. I went to boarding school in Connecticut. But growing up in Anchorage, having this distrust of government from early on, distrust of just people in general, and then seeing up close exactly how much money Google was spending on the election cycle on both sides, how involved Facebook was, and I wasn't even at the company at that time, in the pre-election process, how folks were being sent to Texas to work with the Trump campaign. I just thought all of it confirmed everything that I had thought already about the interplay between the private sector and government. And I think the recent Exxon video that was released of the Exxon lobbyist, who it went viral, who's talking about how they essentially lobby a list of folks in Congress, go to their offices all of the time, make sure they're donating in the right way. Same thing is happening at the tech companies. So it was really interesting to see that and to learn. I talked about it this morning in a conversation I had on KQED about how to use press and how to use marketing and how to use policy to further your aims.
So I just wanted to ask you a quick question, and then maybe there's not that much difference, but you've spoken a lot about the similarities between these big three. Was there anything that struck you as different or disparate, or anything that would be like remarkable in terms of like an ethos of the people who were really working there versus what their policy goals were?
I guess the big difference is at Pinterest, there were no policy goals because there wasn't a competent person. There was only one person on the policy team, and he was not competent. And so there was no policy that was laid out. As far as the people who worked there, they truly believed in dear leader, Ben, and thought that he was an honestly nice person. And I think that was what was so shocking about the disclosures that I made, that my former colleague made, that Francois, the former COO, made, because a ton of people had the bubble sort of burst, who had truly believed, I'm at Pinterest because it's better than Facebook and because it's better than Google. And even though the business model is the exact same, our CEO is a good person.
I always found that it's so interesting because like you spoke of CEOs and just the business as a whole. And I think you touched on this in your New York Times opinion piece as well. And I always like when you consider that they're separate entities with separate interests and separate impacts. I would love to hear your response to that and get a couple of your thoughts.
As far as the CEOs and the business, or
in terms of that they're different interest groups in and of themselves. So especially with regards to like NDAs and applying those and how it affects the company at large.
Yeah, the point I was making in the New York Times piece is that NDA reform and transparency in general are a benefit to shareholders and to those who invest in companies, whether on the VC side or on the public company investment side, because the use of silencing mechanisms protects individuals. So whether that individual is the general counsel, in my case, or a manager, or the CEO himself, shareholders are not benefiting and the general public isn't. And so it's really important for those of us who are critiquing the industry or commenting on it in any way, or certainly pushing policy changes, to understand that there are individuals at the heart of all of this. And so even though the company and the management of the company will say that, hey, this is about protecting the company and the company's culture, what it is ultimately is protecting certain individuals. And so if we're able to separate the two things, then we can get to some level of accountability. But otherwise, it's just Facebook is bad or Google is bad, when really we have Joel Kaplans and we have individuals who Kate knows very well, who are making decisions and are not actually representative of this amorphous concept of a company.
So there's been a big move recently to kind of have more disclosures, like what you've done at Pinterest. Like that was not just Pinterest. Like, I mean, Meredith Whittaker, and there have been, there have been lots and lots of people who have kind of stepped out and said these companies are doing bad things for Y reasons, who have violated NDAs and everything else. I want to get into actually whether the enforceability of NDAs in a second, which is, I think, a fascinating thing. And we kind of talked about it in yesterday's show because we had Nicholas, his last name is like totally
Schmidl,
yeah, thank you. Like he was talking about how he had been embedded with SpaceX Virgin Galactica, and like kind of like for like 4 years, and had written this whole book about like all of this stuff, and he had declined, and like how NDAs had been managed, and like how they'd been kind of held out as things he had to sign to get more access, and like how they kind of negotiate that. So let's table that, but like keep it kind of in the low burner. But can you just like tell us what happened at Pinterest? I think I know really well, Genevieve has now read your article and everything else, but people are catching up. So can you just like kind of tell us like what happened when you entered Pinterest, what happened when you left, and kind of what you discovered in between?
Yeah, I was recruited there to do what I said I was managing earlier, all of the US policy, and then to build out relationships with expert organizations on topics like vaccine misinformation, which is a focus that I had and that I thought fit in perfectly with the business of the platform. It's a platform where 8 in 10 moms in the US are on the platform. Moms, as we know, are the folks making public health decisions for their families and therefore for our communities.
And consumer decisions.
Exactly, which is why they're on Pinterest.
They're the shoppers. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I was doing that, bringing a lot of good attention to the company at a time when it was really important for the company and its shareholders, because the company was pre-IPO in 2019 when I joined, or in 2018 when I joined, and then went public in April of 2019. And it was 2 months after I started, 2 or 3 months after I started, when I was in the middle of managing an inquiry from a Senate committee about opioids on the platform, after leading a policy decision to finally get Alex Jones off the platform. And then I had a key role in writing the first misinformation policies that the platform had, which were actually the first that any social media platform had, that were explicit and that were available for the public to read. So in the middle of doing all of these things and doing the job that I had been hired to do, I then find out, both from stumbling across documents when I was looking for my tax withholding information, and then speaking to a colleague, that I was being paid less than half of what my colleague who was supposedly doing the exact same job was. And not only that, so that was on the cash side. On the equity side, I had been screwed entirely. And so I, in good faith, reached out, asked, like, what's up with this? Knowing exactly what the fuck was up with it. Excuse my language. But knowing what was up,
We say fuck all the time. We say fuck all the time on In Lieu of Fun Show.
Went through the process. I'm someone who's incredibly meticulous when it comes to documentation, so I knew I had to get everything in writing right away. Started taking notes, creating a timeline for what I hoped wouldn't happen, but what eventually needed to happen, which was hiring an attorney. So fast forward, I gave the company 6-7 months to address the issue. Finally reached out to an attorney, and the whole time I'm representing the company publicly, engaging with organizations like the WHO, the CDC, Color of Change, you name it, across the spectrum of issues that a company has on content moderation. I'm engaging with folks on behalf of the company. And the whole time was being told that my work was excellent, but I was not worthy of being paid fairly and according to the chart that the company had. So I wasn't even coming up with a number out of thin air. I was using the company's own leveling chart and saying, like, here's the description of the work, here's the work that I'm doing. And not only here's the work I'm doing, here's the NPR interview I just did with Audie Cornish. Here's the Guardian article where the company is being mentioned for the first time. One of the things that was in the documentation that my attorney sent, and when I spoke to him for the first time, he was like, I only think this will be 10 hours of work maximum for me, because I've never had a client who not only has a timeline, but has internal documentation from the company on what she should be paid, but then also has external documentation like a front page Wall Street Journal article 2 months before the company went public. Never had happened. The Wall Street Journal wasn't really covering Pinterest, and certainly not on policy issues, where the company is being called out as a leader for taking action in a space where other platforms aren't, right before the company went public. There was just so much evidence that in his mind, it both was common sense and would have been egregious for them not to address it. And yet they did not. I ended up filing complaints with the state. So I went through the whole process that you would if you were trying to exhaust all of your avenues before filing a lawsuit. And then the pandemic hit. So in March was when I was forced into mediation that resulted in the agreement that I was presented with. And as someone who has always believed in fighting, I really had, it was the toughest time, both physically and emotionally for me, that I have faced since my mom died when I was in college. Because I knew that I wanted to take it to court, but it was the beginning of a pandemic. And so I would have been out of health insurance. I would have been out of compensation while trying to file a lawsuit that probably wouldn't have been scheduled for a court date until maybe the end of the year, if even. At that point in March, we had no idea where things were going to go with the pandemic. But because of the work that I did and the public health folks who I was in contact with, I knew it was going to be really bad. And so the decision I made was to sign the bullshit that they gave me, while knowing that at some point I would tell my story. I just wasn't sure when or how.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I didn't even know all of that. Like there was, I mean, I didn't know the timing of a lot of that.
Yeah.
That is so stressful. Like, I'm so sorry that you went through all of that. That is like, it's also kind of like, I don't want to, I think that we're getting to a point where we understand PTSD is like a much more nuanced thing, but like that type of like, I remember really deeply when I will not name the company, but it was a very large financial management company. I was hired as a speechwriter. I was only a couple years out of college and writing for the president. And I had this boss that just made my life a living hell. And for like, I finally left, and by the time I left, it was like, but I would just have like for 8 months after that, I would wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweats with dreams of her screaming at me and just like hating myself and like everything. And like, there are just things of toxic work environments that are not, like maybe the whole work environment isn't toxic, but you start to have like this secreted kind of one-dimensional interaction with it, and it all just poisons and becomes very bad and very hard to live through. And I'm sorry that you went through that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think PTSD is the right term for it, because again, like my mom passed away my sophomore year of college, and I developed serious sleep issues, like could not sleep. It was like a few hours a week I was sleeping. I had finally, it took 6 years at that point, or 7 years, to then develop good sleeping habits, be able to like go to sleep and function as a normal human being. And then the pincher stuff just like sent me right back. Could not sleep anymore, like couldn't eat properly. So I developed stomach issues. It was all bad. It was all really bad. And so thinking about how bad it was, understanding that my mom, who was in perfect health, then all of a sudden had cancer and died. So as someone who is, I think, a rational risk taker, not having health insurance in this country is not one of those risks that I'm just willing to take from personal experience. It wasn't an option.
Yeah. It's also like this whole dynamic of corporate gaslighting on top of the disproportionate power dynamics at play that truly underscore why NDAs can be so harmful and are so harmful in certain contexts. And that's not even getting into the fact that there's different elements to NDAs, because it's not just a blanket non-disclosure. There are like certain things that they carve out where it's like a non-cooperation provision. So
that
even
was
if,
in mine.
Yep. So it's like, even if someone else comes forward, you can't assist them in any way. And so, I mean, it's not to say that there isn't a place for a non-disclosure in a corporate setting, but the way that it's utilized to curtail free speech rights, just employment opportunity rights, and just your own personal rights is bizarre to me, because I can't, and I mean, Me Too highlighted a lot of this, but I still find that conversation really is underdeveloped. And I think it's marvelous that you were able to recognize that there's CCP, like, what was it, 1001 that was in place would help you in this aspect.
Yep.
And I think that came out of Me Too, if I'm correct. Or
it did.
I don't remember.
It did.
Okay.
It was one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So California was one of, I think, 5 states that passed legislation that came directly out of Me Too and addressed non-disclosure agreements, one of the reasons why I'm co-sponsoring the Silence No More Act in California right now, even though it won't impact me since I'm a New Mexico resident at this point, is is because one, the intersectionality wasn't addressed at all. The Stand Act, which then became CCP 1001, addressed sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, and sexual assault. Those all made sense, were really important, and were what could get passed at that time in California. Because it's not just what makes the best public policy, it's what can get through the political process. Now we're rectifying that and including all of the different recognized forms of discrimination. But then also the part that a lot of people don't recognize with the bill is we're addressing non-disparagement agreements, which have not been addressed by any state in the country and really any jurisdiction in the world that I know of. And it's really important because the non-disparagement piece in separation agreements, and that are used often in severance agreements when people are laid off, does almost the exact same thing as a non-disclosure.
Could you speak a little bit more about that just for our chorus?
So for separation agreements, there's the triple non. There's the non-disclosure, non-compete, and then the non-disparagement. The non-compete, which people think of in the tech context as like working at another company, it's not that. It's what you mentioned, that you can't work with someone else on their own case. So even if you decide I'm not going to sue and you release your claims and what you sign, if someone else were to come forward like Francoise did, the former CEO of Pinterest, I could not, because of what I was forced to sign, then testify to help her and establish a pattern of events at the company. The non-disparagement piece, and they're both NDA, which is really confusing in the context of separation agreements and employment agreements. Non-disparagements can list people, as mine did, who I could not specifically disparage. I was told I could not disparage the company in any way, its shareholders in any way, or do anything or say anything that could be construed as disparagement.
So this is not going to be like this is not totally cognizant, and I don't know the background of these types of things legally, but in my mind, my inclination, my very layman's kind of inclination of how I understand NDAs and non-disparagement clauses and non-compete clauses is non-compete end up more in the IP realm of like basically don't and trade secrets, like don't like go and share like the secret recipe for Coke, right? Non-disparagement is kind of in the realm of like, don't tell anyone how crappy it is, as Lisa said, to work in this place, and that would be like in the defamation realm, I guess, like, or the opinion realm, depending on whether or not what you said is true. And yes. Truth is always a rebuttal to defamation. So, but I'm just saying that, but like it is a positive right that you get by contract, or the company gets by contract, by forcing you to say you're not going to disparage them. And then that the non-disclosure is just this overbroad, very much like you can't speak about anything that you saw or did within the company. And so like I actually want to like kind of hit on the NDA, like the non-disclosure agreement, which is what NDA typically refers to, even though the other ones kind of they're like not like non-disparagement would fall into the same thing. But like one of the things that really hit me when I walked into, and if you've ever walked into a tech company, they're full of kiosks and you don't get past security. I mean, like this is most places these days. You have to show ID, you have to do whatever. But like at a tech company, it's not just that. You have to show up, you should tell which department you're meeting with. Why is I'm having some problem with my keyboard, and all of my text box in the chat is filling with dashes right now, and I have no idea, and I can't stop it. Anyway, but Ben, generally speaking, that there is this kind of like that you show up and you sign over your soul, and there's nothing you can do about it, and like because you want to get into the company, and so they're like. In contract law, we call that click wrap. Like there's just kind of like this idea that you just like kind of like click past something and you agree. questionable how much that's enforceable and everything else. But that kind of goes for NDAs. Like that's like, and a lot of judges are very loath, not so much with trade secret and non-compete, and that's not true of non-compete and non-disparagement, but with non-disclosure agreements, they are loath to enforce them. And generally speaking, they're kind of pretty not unenforceable. And when I went into Facebook and embedded there, and they were like, everyone was freaking out that in a non-disclosure agreement, there was this kind of idea that, like, I have to be honest, I just didn't, like, I was like, well, I never thought that this would be really, I don't really, like, that doesn't apply to me. Like, if I had something, and it didn't apply to me because of the reasons that you're kind of talking about and that you've been relying on, Ifeoma, which is just that, like, if you say something true and you can back it up and you can prove, like, so you can prove it, that there is, like, basically, like, there is in this country, because we're still a free country, I think, most of the time, in Aaron Sorkin's universe, like, basically, like, this idea that, like, no, we're not going to shut you up from saying that type of thing. Like, that's something that, like, we want more people to know more, and we're not going to have overbroad NDAs, and we're not going to enforce them. And, like, I feel like half of Silicon Valley is completely unaware of this.
Well,
half, 3/4.
Yes. So a really important thing, non-compete and non-disparagement, in the context I'm talking about for my separation agreement, were 100% about not talking. And the non-compete, I don't know if you've actually seen one of these, Kate, in a separation agreement where the company is really afraid you're going to say the types of things that I have said since June of last year, there is an actual clause in my separation agreement that said I could not work with anyone else who came forward about anything that they experienced at the company. That was the way that non-compete was used in the separation agreement. Not I couldn't go share trade secrets. That was an entirely different agreement that I had to sign on confidentiality as it pertained to intellectual property and trade secrets. So not only is non-compete used in that way, in the trade secrets way, which is totally legitimate and whatever, but it's being used to silence people as well. And the disparagement bit was also part of the, we don't want you talking about anyone in any way. And disparagement and defamation, as someone who had an attorney, am not an attorney, but I'm pretty well versed on what flies legally, is something that you would be taking a risk with. And the reason why NDAs are so powerful is not because they're usually non-enforceable if you take it to court. How many people do you know have the resources and the time to take a case to court? Against Google, against Facebook, against Pinterest, against Apple.
But here is the rub. They look like fucking assholes if they come after people like you or me.
Like assholes, and you're unemployed in a pandemic.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, they can't. So this is actually, I wish more people kind of, well, sometimes I wonder how much I wish that people didn't understand the unenforceability of law. But, because, you know, that could end up really badly for a lot of us. But there's like.
We've seen a little bit of it over the past couple years.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. But, like, I think that you're exactly right. And, like, having spent, like, now the last 6 years talking to people in Silicon Valley about their experiences, there's, like, quite a few people who I started off that were very, very, very reluctant to talk to me, and then, like, slowly, gradually just were like, oh, well, it just doesn't matter. And the reason they realized it doesn't matter is because more people like you came out and did this stuff, and then it was seen that the NDA was, like, not that big a deal, and that they weren't going to enforce it, and that yes, that they had the money and the resources to try to enforce it, but that a judge was not going to uphold it in most cases.
So the reason why I think we need protections codified, though, is because for how many low-income workers is it an option to even test that theory? When you're being threatened by your employer, whether you're a nanny and you have the family you're working for who presents you with an NDA and says they'll sue you to hell. They'll maybe throw your immigration status into jeopardy, or your family's, or whatever other threat comes with it. Are you really taking that chance? And so that's why I think we need protections that are codified, like the Silence No More Act, so that there's no ambiguity. And so that in these contracts and in these agreements, it's very clear that if you experience discrimination or harassment, that's not what we're saying is covered by the non-disclosure and non-disparagement piece. It's just everything else. Should everything else be covered? That's a different conversation, but I think at the very least, it should be very clear to everyone, no matter your education, no matter the resources you have, your understanding of the law, that you do have the right to talk about discrimination, harassment, or assault.
It just reeks of bad faith.
It does reek of bad faith. It also just reeks of like, it's anti-liberty, it's anti-speech, it's I don't know, it's anti, in some ways, association, because it cuts you off from associating with the people that you would protest with, or like to do. It's exploitive, as Anne says in the chat, and I think that that's exactly right. I have good hopes for this going forward, but I do think the law is on your side, frankly. I just think that like actually NDAs have been completely. I think that like companies have manipulated employees with NDAs, not just employees, but reporters with NDAs for like a very, very long time. And I mean, like, the other thing is that I make a point of like not, and this is like completely true, like when I sign my name on that stupid kiosk, I just put an X, because like I want it to be clear that I'm like actually like, if I ever have to show that like that waiver to a judge, that like I barely read it and like didn't actually think about it and didn't like take the time to sign my name legibly, but like that this is like, and like I think that that's like, sorry, that is like such a critical legal studies like move, but like I just like just think that it's like such bullshit, and I'm so glad to kind of like, I'm so grateful for people like you that are doing this type of work, and you're amazing. I also do that for the rock climbing gym, which maybe isn't as great an idea. I'm like, who knows? We have a couple of questions. I'm gonna bring in Richard.
Hello.
Richard, so great to talk to you. So Richard had a question about like, what do you call them? You called them suspension agreements or separation agreements?
Separation agreements, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess my question, well, I guess it relates to that, yeah. So I'm curious if there are patterns that we can detect in how courts have handled cases in which ex-employees violate the terms of NDAs or separation agreements, and how often do companies actually go after people for these things? I know in my own experience, one company that let me go required me to sign a separation agreement in exchange for getting about a month and a half pay for as severance. But you know, the separation agreement, and I guess it's designed this way. It's there, I think, partly just to scare the shit out of you. So anyway, I'm just curious, what have we seen when these things actually do get to court?
I'm not the lawyer, so please jump in. But a former Trump campaign employee took it to federal court recently, a few months ago, and even in that ruling, the judge ruled really narrowly for the employee, not even for other employees within the organization or on NDAs in general. So yes, I think most judges will not enforce NDAs, but then why wouldn't that judge make a broader ruling about their use? It's the signals that are being sent, even if you really focus on this stuff, are confusing to people. And certainly if you don't have any background in the law, the point is to scare the shit out of you and scare people into silence, which it's done.
I can speak to the legal issue of why a judge isn't going to make a broader ruling in this context, which is that like most judges, not the Supreme Court, are not, whether they're federal or state judges, are not in the business of making law. They're in the business of applying the law to the law that is before them. And especially if they're a trial judge, that is specifically what they're designed to do. So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing, though, is that these are all contract disputes, which is what an NDA is something that comes into bounds with like the public-private distinction and a First Amendment right versus like a public contract right. And there is like, and a private contract right. And you're trying to kind of balance the value of both of them. And you're trying to kind of put one above the other. And so you're making that balance, and it's sui generis. Every single one of those balances is going to be a little bit different. And so they're not going to want to make an overbroad distinction. So this makes, as my third point, the laws that you're working on so much more important, because they take this from a common law, like contract by contract, dispute by dispute type of resolution, to something that is like a top down, we're going to make a new act, we're going to make a new law, it's going to go through the processes of democracy and reach that level of legitimacy. And you do that, and like then judges are going to be able to say yes. And like then the question will be like, well, does this fit into this bill or not? And like it does this, like is this answered by this bill or not? And eventually, maybe there will be questions of whether the bill fits into a constitutional framework or not.
And we've thought about that.
Yes, exactly. Those are the two things you have to think about.
The bill
yes,
will get at some point.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
But both of those will it'll be things that come up and like fit within the framework of the bill, and then it'll be things that challenge the bill itself. And that's like how the system works, and that's the system working the best that it possibly can. But until then, we're just going to have these piecemeal approaches. And there will only be this underground lore of like an NDA is unenforceable that I start spreading through my Twitter feed, apparently. So I think that is, I'm just so glad that I just think that this bill is so important, and like I'm glad that you're doing this. Shailesh, hi, so nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. So I have a big picture question about healthy work environments. So I have teenage daughters, and I always tell them that higher education, sort of besides enabling you in your career, gives you access to like healthy work environments and colleagues who are nice people. And I know that this is not entirely true, but it seems like a good general principle. So, but what are your thoughts, having been through all this, on choosing good working environments? And also on a related note, like if tech companies cannot maintain healthy work environments, then I really shudder to think about what's happening in other industries where there isn't even a pretense of having these kind of values. So I just wanted your general views on this.
Oh, that's such a good point and such a good question. I mean, I don't think it gets more, and this, what is a way to say this that doesn't make me look like an asshole? I don't think it gets more elite than going from Yale to Google to Facebook. Pinterest is a throwaway, but I did not meet those nice people in positions of power that I would hope you're referring to. There were nice people who I worked with, but the further you get up the chain, so management, GC level, CEO level, they're making decisions that protect themselves. They're making decisions that protect what they see as their priorities. And so is it better than the people who are being physically abused at work? Absolutely. And who have no financial ability to choose a different job? Sure. But is it better in general? I don't know. Because even at these companies too, there are different classes of workers. So there are folks who are like me who are full-time, but then if you're at Alphabet, over 50% of the workforce are in contract roles, where they're people who are in janitorial and they're people who are working in the kitchen staff and are being treated terribly while still working alongside folks who have a lot more in the way of resources. So I don't mean to be depressing, and certainly not for your teenage daughters and their prospects, but I do think it's really important to keep sort of an eyes wide open view on these industries, where for a lot of my former colleagues, they have golden handcuffs now. So you work in this industry your entire career, you then have a mortgage and a family that can only be supported by that level of income, and then you end up in a situation where you're being abused at work and you can't leave.
And I just want to footstep the one thing that Ifeoma said, was that having those educational opportunities allows you to have more opportunities, and the opportunity to change your situation is I think the most important thing that she said out of the entire thing, because that's what would allow you to get out of a horrible situation.
Yeah, and if I may add one quick thing. So, I mean, the sort of calculating part of it is, it at least actually gives you power to fight back. I mean, if you don't even have those resources, then where are you, right? So I don't need to say that to them. I try to portray a more positive message, but thanks so much for your commentary on this. This is really an important topic.
Yeah, thank you.
Shailesh, thank you so much. Can I add something that I think is like, Andrew, like I think is like an interesting thing, because we've been talking about this inside the U.S. for like so much, and like some of our audience is not within the U.S., but not a ton of them are in the global South. But one of the things that I found really remarkable when I was embedded at Facebook was that there was this ritual at around like 5:30 or 6 o'clock every night, in which like I would be finishing up my meetings and following around people with their meetings, and I would just notice that in the hallways, because like Facebook is this enormous campus with all of these like little micro kitchens with tons of beverages and like free stuff everywhere, and like, you know, and all of these like incredible like giant dining halls that are basically full of like incredible food. And what you would see is like, you would see like these families coming in to the campus, and they were traditionally, I would say, South Asian and like people of color, and they would be bringing in the grandma and the kids and like and so it was like the whole extended family, and they'd all sit down and have dinner like at the campus, and like that this was like this thing that they had. These people are on visas. Like the people that are like bringing their families in are working for Google and for Facebook and for Apple and for all of these companies on visas. Do you think they can do what Ifeoma did? Hell no, they can't do that, because they don't have citizenship.
Hell no
they can't. And do you think that like these companies are not aware, as there is this thrashback inside the companies of people fighting against the companies and using their union power and all of these various ideas, that they're like, well, if we diversify like our like employee base, we can get rid of this problem of having of basically like having people that are going to fight back. If you're an H-1B and you have your entire family, you've managed to bring your entire family over to San Francisco, which is incredibly expensive, and maybe you're living in almost a tenement style situation with like a couple of people in a couple of bedrooms and like making it work, and you're supporting everyone or not, and maybe there are other people working, but like, are you gonna like push back because like a lot of people think that this is like a non-free speech or non-liberty informative or not progressive enough type of value? No, you are not. And so I just think that this is like something that like, it is incredible to me that we're not talking about the actual mechanics of like how some of that like employee power gets globalized. We talk so much about globalizing this from like the perspective of like, okay, we like send this all to other people. We're not talking about kind of this idea of how like globalizing changes the standard at which like the US has one standard in which we all have a privilege and an expectation to live, I don't know if we'd call it a privilege so much as a right, or a privilege or a right, but like whatever, maybe it is both. But anyways, I just like, I think this is something that like you must have seen this.
Oh, absolutely. And I've heard from those folks. I've heard from dozens of people who have said, I would love to talk about what happened to me, but I can't. I actually wrote an article, and I'll drop it in the chat for those who are here. I don't know how chat interplays with YouTube, but hopefully we can share it there, about the tie between healthcare and this. I would not be here talking to you about this if I had kids right now, because I know that if I had kids, the $900 I'm paying a month for Cobra, which is rent for some people, and certainly could be rent here in Santa Fe, to keep my insurance would be near $2,000 if I had a family of 4 that I was supporting on my health insurance. And so I never would have brought it up. I never would have hired a lawyer if I were at Pinterest and supporting other people on my health insurance. Cobra is the continuation of benefits, extortion, essentially.
Mateo is an adorable one of your brethren. He is a Yale University student who joins us, but he doesn't know what Cobra is because Mateo, you've never had to use Cobra because you're 19 years old or something. I'm like, so. Cobra is why you have to have a job to leave a job. My God, is that true? But it's a good chat, right? Like they're really smart.
$900 a month, and I've heard from people who pay more to keep their coverage after they leave. And if I had stopped paying for Cobra, I would not have insurance, and I would not be able to cover the things that I need to cover as someone who needs specialized health insurance in this country. So it's not just folks who have their visa status at risk, it's folks who also have health insurance needs. I spoke to someone whose kid was receiving cancer treatment, and their kid was on their company health insurance, and they were being harassed by someone they worked with and weighed whether they should say anything, because if they said anything, they would not be able to afford the cancer treatment their kid was on. That, God bless America. Like, that's where we are.
Totally insane. Completely insane. But like, this is like, I really just, like, why are we not having that conversation? I don't feel like I know, but like, but if you like, there's like, I have not had this conversation with like, I don't hear the yoke of losing healthcare and the yoke of supporting like your extended family or like losing your visa like in the dialogue that much. I just and you're right. Maybe some of us are, but not all of us are. And so I'm glad that you're here to kind of share what you're seeing. Paula, you have the last question today.
Thank you. So my question is like, do you try to balance like the cynicism and idealism in your career? I feel like balance is such like an Instagram like vibe, but I think sometimes it leads.
Oh my God, Paula, do you see her background right now? Like, don't even gorgeous. Instagram vibe me. Like she's like literally stepped out of an Instagram photo.
But I feel like it is like kind of like this buzzword, like you need to find all of this balance. But at the same time, I do think it leads people astray. And I think Kate touched on this really well, and so did you at the beginning, where also I find like what's super toxic is like the low expectations for the administrations or companies that appear so like fluffy and good on the outside because you lean left, or like Pinterest like has a great aesthetic and it just comes off differently than Facebook does. And so I wonder what you think about those, you know, different expectations that we have for maybe a Democratic administration where people think it's more progressive. So they kind of have different standards. But so those are my 2 questions, and thank you.
Yeah, well, capitalism runs everything. So I don't have any different expectations for the Biden administration, as we're saying. I'm actually, the only thing that has shocked me in the policy realm recently is the Democrats in the Texas legislature actually standing up for something and leaving the state to make sure that those terrible bills aren't passed. nothing else that I've seen is surprising. As for balance, I moved to New Mexico as a way of getting balance, getting out of the Bay Area, because I really felt
Tell
like
us
my
about
soul
your
was
chickens.
crumbling. I have 7 chickens, and I don't have names for all of them yet, but I have a few names, so I'm soliciting others. My favorite name right now is Yoko Ono, which I think is a pretty good one that I found online. Bacquafina, Cardi Beak.
Oh, I love that.
And yeah, I think that's it right now. So I need 4 more chicken pun names. And I love my chickens, and I have 2 dogs, so I'm running kind of a farm here. But that's how I find balance. I don't think I'm going to find balance in any institutions currently. And just having a practicality in the way I address things is important to me. The consulting firm that I started last year, I named Earthseed after Octavia Butler's teachings in the parable books. And the reason why I did is because the whole philosophy that Butler had and that she put into the teachings in those 2 books is around expanding what's possible by using the current systems and by using what's practical. And that's what I feel like I'm doing through this bill. Like pushing legislation through the California legislative process is miserable. It's we introduced the bill in February, and it's been just non-stop since then. But it's important, and it's worth it, because if it passes, 40 million people will be impacted. That's the kind of impact that I think is really important to push for. And there isn't an optimism in, well, I don't think of myself as an optimistic person, but I guess if you work on anything long term, you sort of have to be. So maybe I am a little bit.
I think you're optimistic.
Yeah, I'm realistic
you are.
about. Yeah, sure. But I think it's important to be realistic about what currently exists, about the limitations that we have as human beings who are, like, at our core selfish and will drive things towards our own means for the most part. And so with that, I guess balance is coming to Santa Fe. Balance is stopping buying expensive plants at plant stores, because everything except for my $10 Home Depot Monstera has died. So I find balance in different ways.
Yeah, that's I think that we'll leave it there. Balance in different ways. So we will be back 23 hours and 58 minutes from now with Jonathan Lusthouse, who is going to be talking about cybersecurity with Scott and Ben. And until then, Genevieve,
we don't have fun anymore, but fortunately we have pending statutory law that can provide protections for a lot of people. Write your representatives.
Yes. So happy to see you. Bye, friends.